Welcome. I'm Lita Mae Button, and welcome to the weekly Dildo Dilemma Humor in the Face of Trauma podcast. I want you to imagine being paralyzed by fear because each step you've taken forwards up to this point was blocked with the obstacles that live inside: doubt, insecurities, feelings of abandonment. That was me from the age of 16 to 22. Then, bam, life sucker punched me, and I became a single parent to my son with a lifelong and at times life threatening blood disorder called hemophilia B severe factor IX deficiency. And I knew that I needed to deal with these obstacles to be strong and help him grow into a productive and well adjusted adult. So I began boxing competitively, and through one punch, one competition, facing one fear at a time, I did it. I learned how to punch back at life, absorbing the shock of life's blows and channeling those blows into empowering myself and tackling those fears in the ring, which helped ripple out to a positive effect into my everyday life, which gave me the confidence to live life on my own terms and be the number one role model for my son. And also, if the need should arise, be able to protect us. And it's why I'm a motivational speaker and coach and do what I do, because I know the end result when you're empowered from every level of being that you are as a human, especially with being a woman. Because when a woman steps into and takes back her power from the inside out, it has a rippling effect that the world needs to heal. And when a woman empowers herself, first and foremost, she shows and nurtures unto others what is possible. And it can teach us as well how to treat each other with love, kindness, and compassion. And the world needs this more than ever, especially when it comes to ending violence against women. So if you're watching this today or you're watching the replay, that's why I'm doing the weekly podcast. And I've started the movement called Dildo Dilemma, Humor in the Face of Trauma. It's about bringing stories through humor and boxing principles to create awareness, advocacy, and action to help eliminate violence against women in Newfoundland and worldwide. And in case you're wondering why Newfoundland, well, two reasons. It's my home and it's my family's home. And I recently found out in the last few months that the violence against women statistic in Newfoundland is a little bit higher than the rest of Canada. 1 in 2 women over the age of 15 will experience a form of stalking or violence in their lifetime. And I want to help make lasting changes for my family now and my grandkids that would be born in the future. But first, to make changes, we have to focus on what's going on and happening inside us and closest to us. So that's why I'm focusing on advocating and sharing education about Newfoundland. And second, Newfoundland's just plain awesome. It's Canada's most eastern province, and it's an island to just over 500,000 people with its own time zone and the name of towns like Blow Me Down and Dildo. However, an imposter in 2019 by the name of Jimmy Kimmel has claimed himself as mayor of our town of Dildo, yet he's not once visited Dildo or even stepped into the island of Newfoundland. In fact, he's not even Canadian. And I just found out recently, too, some other dude by the name of Jerry D, who's also not a Newfoundlander, is trying to run for the honorary mayorship of Dildo as well. I really think it's time to put a woman in charge to advocate for Newfoundland's health and well-being. It's really what we call a dildo dilemma. It's time for a woman to help lead and make changes to nurture instead of demanding. So if you're watching this, make sure hashtag Lita Mae Button, hashtag Mayor of Dildo, hashtag nurturing leadership, hashtag dildo dilemma, hashtag time for change. So thank you so much for listening to the introduction. Now to introduce our special guest here today, Michelle Keith. Michelle, will you please let our listeners and viewers know what your background is and why you said yes to coming on to the weekly Dildo Dilemma Humor in the Face of Trauma podcast?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I'm Michelle, and currently I am a romance author. My husband and I started writing romance. I mean, when we first met, when we were kids, basically, we were 16-year-olds sending little love letters to each other. And 10 and a half years ago, we quit our day jobs to start writing romance full time. Um, But the reason why I wanted to come on the podcast is because I am a former sex worker. I was a stripper for several years, and it was one of the most interesting and, you know, strange times of my life, and I met so many people through that. And I started volunteering with the St. John's Status of Women Council with their SHOP program, which is the Safe Harbor Outreach Project. So that's a service that's available to all sex workers, specifically women and trans women and non-binary people. And they help so many people who do various types of sex work. Um, so a few years ago, I was at the FemFest and I did a talk about capitalism, feminism, and sex work, and how um, trying to clear up, I guess, some of the tangly bits that where it feels feminist to kind of have these certain values or beliefs or thoughts about legalization of sex work and how to protect sex workers, and what actually helps and protects sex workers, and how to um, look at these things in the lens of the world that we live in right now, not a fantasy world where we can just change everything to make it all perfect. Um, but actually, we have misogyny, we have patriarchy, we have all of these things. We have capitalism. We have to pay bills, and you know, sex work is a choice that people make. And there's gray areas about how much of a choice that is, just like with every job. Most people don't wake up every morning wanting to go to work. So, yeah, I just wanted to come on and hopefully answer some questions and uh, get people thinking about what this means and what values they may be held that aren't entirely um, based in harm reduction.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, in terms of education and um, understanding the terminology and the gray area, because you did mention that, is there, I know that you mentioned about different terminology because um, would you be able to educate the audience in terms of what the difference is for the correct terminology for sex work
Yeah.
is?
So sex work is work. That is when somebody is freely engaging in a form of sex work. So forms of sex work might be something like full service sex, which is formerly known as prostitution. It can be stripping, OnlyFans, phone sex operators, basically anything where sex is a major component of the work and in an interfacing way. So, like, you're dealing usually with clients. Um, so, sex work is not trafficking, it's not sexual slavery. Uh, by law, children are not able to consent to sex work. So, it is never considered sex work when a child is involved. Um, so, like, I'm not really discussing human trafficking or sexual slavery, things like that. I'm talking about people who are in this for many complicated reasons, but because it is, for whatever reason, an option that they've decided on. Whether there's, I need to pay my bills, so I'm going to, go work a night or two. That is kind of the umbrella. So the reason why sex workers have fought for these terms is because sex work is a labor issue. So down in the US, where the term kind of originated, it was really trying to look at it through a labor perspective. So when a workplace is dangerous, we don't say that that workplace should be illegal. So the fishery is a dangerous workplace.
Yeah.
So what we have are regulations, safety standards, protocols. Um, we look at things through, we want people who fish to be safe as they possibly can, you know, uh, and we want to support that. So sex workers are also hoping for the same type of thing. They want, certain aspects of their job to be supportive. And so, yeah, that's the main terminology. It can also be called the sex industry or the sex trade. There's kind of, it depends regionally, just what people prefer. Uh, it's always best to let people self-identify. So if somebody says like that they're a sex worker, that's what they are. You don't ask what type of sex worker they are. That's kind of rude.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of like queer. Queer is an umbrella term for a lot of different you know, sexualities and genders. Uh, so sex work is the same thing. If somebody says they're a stripper, exotic dancer, uh, prostitute, hooker, whore, like whatever somebody wants to self-identify as, respect that, obviously. But yeah, using the umbrella term tends to be safe. Um, and human trafficking is something that happens in a lot of industries. In Canada right now, we have a real problem with human trafficking in regards to agriculture, and that's globally one of the biggest fields of trafficking. So I think we all know that somebody can choose to work on a farm, and
Yeah.
as long as they're well compensated and they are free to leave that farm at any time, work on another farm, quit altogether, then we know that that's a job and that's work. Once somebody is being coerced or held, they can't leave, then that's no longer work. That is trafficking.
Yeah.
And that's the same kind of designation with stripper, like with sex work. If you can leave at any time, then it's work. If you can't because somebody else is pressuring you,
Yeah.
then it's trafficking.
Have you ever witnessed that yourself?
There's a lot of people who I know have had kind of that gray area.
Yeah.
Some of them have, you know, been involved at a young age as children. And then as adults, they went back to that work because, it was a way to make money. It's different once you're in control and once you have that power.
Exactly.
Um, there have been people who've like it gets blurry at times, especially with relationships and interpersonal relationships where there might be some coercion. So just like anything, it's kind of like, when does an abusive relationship become an abusive relationship? It's not always clear,
Yeah.
right? Um, so yeah, and I think with sex work, it adds an extra layer to that, but it's kind of the same dynamic.
Well, thank you for that clarity and explaining that. Um, did you like what kind of environment when you were working as a stripper in the environment that you're in, can you explain a little bit of the rules and regulations in that environment? Because you expressed
Yeah,
that you felt very safe in that
yeah,
environment compared to another situation.
yeah. So where I worked, it was very clear. There were rules posted on the walls. Everybody knew that, you couldn't touch certain areas. You couldn't, you know, engage in certain behaviors. Obviously, there was no sex. There was no touching below the waist. There's, and obviously the people working could also have um, their own boundaries that they were freely able to enforce. If anybody was trying to break those rules or you know, be a horrible person. We had lots of bouncers. Like we had like massive guys just standing out there waiting. And if any girl came to them and said like this guy's getting handsy, like you have like Jason Statham like coming in and like just dragging you out. Um, so it always felt very safe. It always felt very people had your back. Uh, Girls looked out for each other. So like if somebody was being too aggressive, like we'd usually go chat in the dressing room. Even girls that didn't really get along, if there was a problem, like suddenly everybody was kind of on the same team of
Yeah.
like, no, this guy's got to go. The bartenders, like the wait staff and everything, were also very supportive. Um, I had so few bad nights and so few bad clients. I'd say 98% of the people that I talked to or that I danced for were perfectly respectful and, just out for a good time. Um, so the very small percent of times that I had trouble, I think I had to get a bouncer involved, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. Like it was not very much. And when I did, it was always handled really quickly. So there was great clarity of what's allowed and what's not. It was very upfront. Everybody knew kind of what they were getting into. It was, I was going to dance for this, you know, one song and I would get paid this much money. Um, so it was great. It was very clear. A lot of different types of sex work don't have that. Some of it because of the laws that we have around sex work, um, specifically off of, there's like one law that's called living off the avails. And that basically means that a sex worker is paying you money. So it kind of under the law becomes a pimping relationship, even if that person that you're paying is a driver or a bodyguard or somebody like that, somebody that you are choosing to keep you safe. Uh, they can be charged under living off the avails, like your landlord, rent, things like that. Um, so those are things that really impact the safety of people. I think a lot of people would feel a lot safer knowing that there was somebody that they could call on, that there was a bouncer or bodyguard like outside the hotel door or whatever, that there's somebody that they can call. Because I personally found that really, really
It's a
safe.
it's a safety net, yeah.
Yeah,
Because you're in a very can be potentially in a very vulnerable situation. So
yeah,
having that backup, right?
yeah,
With muscle
yeah. And I mean,
to take care of business for you.
yeah, and the girls could take care of themselves as well. Like I've definitely seen more than a couple of the girls throw some really good punches and throw some very high heels at people who are trying to get away with more than they should. So
Yeah.
um, that also was nice. Like knowing that okay, if it really escalates, there is a bunch of people around that and if I throw a punch, I'm not going to be thrown out because it's obviously going to be deserved.
Yes, yes. Somebody's not listening to the boundaries that are being set.
Yeah. And so, like, I also have worked several day jobs, office work. And like, I have been in situations where I have felt really uncomfortable,
Mhm.
um, where people higher up than me were saying sexually harassing things to me.
Yeah.
Um, and that was so much harder because um, I was not going to be supported by human resources. Um, this is somebody who is making a lot of money every year. They're in a position of a lot of power.
Yeah.
Um, and I was, a contractor. So it was like I was going to be the one removed. Um, I didn't feel safe reporting it. And people around me were like, oh no, it's great that the boss is flirting with you. Like that's, a good position to be in. Um, and I didn't feel like I had any allies or support around me. And because of the nature of harassment, it's like so much is in between the words or in between the actions where it's almost like you're talking in another language that nobody else can hear. It's like the dog whistle thing. It's like, I know that this is wrong. And I know that you know that this is wrong because you change your behavior when other people are around. You wouldn't say these things to me if we were, in a public place. But that was so much more traumatic. Um, and I think a lot of it is because I felt really gaslit. I felt really powerless. Whereas, like, I had one really bad customer in the strip club, and he was really aggressive and really like mean. He was
Yeah.
mean, and it was really scary. And so, like, I went to a bouncer, he got kicked out. I went to a bartender, I was crying, I was so upset. And, she was like, I am so sorry. Like, we know he's a problem. He's come in a few times before and we've had to kick him out. I usually try to keep an eye out for him, but, he didn't come to the bar this time, I think because he knows that if
Yeah,
he
he's
goes to
gonna
the
get,
bar, he's going to get kicked out.
yeah.
And, like, I just felt really supported and really like, it was an awful night. It was a bad day at work. But I came home and I felt better after like a little while. Whereas in my day job, I didn't have any of that support. It wasn't like I told people and they were outraged on my behalf. I wasn't, every time I kind of broached the topic, it was like, yeah, you know, at best I got like, well, I don't know what you want me to do. And at worst I got, oh, this is actually a good thing. Like, keep it up. And so like that felt really like I have a lot more trauma around that and a lot more trust issues around that than I do with the other experiences because those were all validated. And the development of PTSD, a lot of it comes after the actual incident. So if somebody's hurt but they feel really supported and really cared for, their their chance of getting PTSD goes way down. Um, Even if it was a more severe incident than, somebody else might have experienced. But if that person didn't receive support and didn't receive validation and concern, they're more likely to later get a diagnosis of PTSD. So,
It's very interesting, the difference of like what could be a preconceived notion in terms of an environment that can be a lot more risky versus
yeah.
an environment that's more corporate, structured, quote unquote, uh, blue
Yeah, like
collar.
it's like we had, these like videos that we had to watch about how harassment is wrong and these
Yeah,
behaviors are wrong. But when it actually happens, it's like, oh, but it wasn't really like that, or they were just making a joke, or I'm sure that didn't happen or didn't mean it like that. Like there's a lot of wiggle room, especially when somebody has a lot more power and control.
yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. If you had to give advice to someone watching this or woman that's going through the same kind of things, what kind of like hindsight is 2020, what kind of advice would you give her if she's going through the same kind
It's
of harassment? And
yeah, like I didn't reach out to a lot of people because I didn't feel safe. And I do actually think that was a good option for me because I didn't want to put my job at risk. Um, and I think what I learned was, yeah, I trusted my gut that, you know, this wasn't going to be helpful for me. I did talk to people who were supportive, people outside of the job.
yeah,
Um, and that was good because they were like, what do you mean they're saying this? Um, so I think trying to find people on your side more far removed is good. Like helplines, like I did actually call a couple helplines because I was so stressed out about it. And like even they said like, yeah, that is a really hard position to be in. Um, because of the fact that, yeah, we don't take sexual harassment seriously. I think everybody always wants to wait for it to get to a certain point where they can look at it and say, oh, now it's bad. Um, and like legally, that's kind of what they look at. Like if somebody is
Yeah.
experiencing stalking, a lot of the times it's like, oh, well, you're in public places, like, there's this constant gaslighting, and I think it's at so many different levels. Um, I think the one thing I would say is I believe you that if you feel like something's wrong and that the somebody's treating you in a way that's inappropriate, you are right about it.
Yeah.
Um, you don't have to second guess that. Like you don't have to look at it through somebody else's perspective. If you're uncomfortable, if you get a sick feeling in your stomach every time you have to go to work or interact with that person, if you're in the bathroom stall at work crying over it, that's not you overreacting. There is something very seriously wrong. Um, you are right. You are right to feel like that.
Yeah.
And I'm really sorry that you feel so powerless and alone because it is a really hard position to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing the different perspectives and in terms of reaching out. Do you like I'll put the links and everything after we're done here below, but is there a specific hotline that you reached out to?
Yeah, the sexual violence, I can't, the Newfoundland Labrador Sexual Violence and Assault Crisis Center, I think. I can't remember their full their
I'll look
name,
it up.
but yeah,
Yeah. So is the our province wide? Okay.
yeah. And it was just nice to hear somebody else say that is a really hard situation to be in, and there's not
Yeah.
an easy solution, because I think if there was an easy solution, I'd probably feel stupid for not having thought of it already, or used it. Like it was just kind of validating to hear somebody say that that's really hard position to be in, and I'm not entirely sure, you know, what you need to do, but trust your gut.
Yeah. So when I take it you're no longer in that position because you're writing romance
No,
novels.
no. I now work with my amazing, wonderful husband who I love and value more than anything. So I have the best work environment in the world now.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Uh, is there like, would you describe a little more in terms of the legal system regarding sex
Yeah.
work, in terms of the policies and procedures that you're familiar with?
Yeah. So Canada has specifically prostitution in a legal gray area. So I think back in 2014, a lot of the laws around prostitution were seen as unconstitutional, and they had to be, uh, you know, looked at. And this was happening under Harper. And what we got was kind of a hybrid model, also known as a Nordic model, which is like an asymmetrical kind of legal situation where it is legal to, um, engage in full service sex work, but advertising is illegal. And also like purchasing sex is in this kind of gray area. And also working together is in a legal gray area. So if, you know, two people wanted to work out of, like, if they wanted to rent a house and work out of that together, it might be seen as, something under living off the avails, or pimping, or whatever. There's a bunch of tangly loopholes,
Right.
basically.
Right.
Um, so we kind of live in this world where it's legal to do it technically, but a lot of the facets attached to it are not legal. And so down in the US, there was two bills called SESTA and FOSTA. Um, and they essentially banned a lot of advertising venues and social media from like allowing certain conversations of sex work. So like the big thing that came from it was Backpage being taken down. So Backpage was a place where a lot of people were advertising, and that was providing them an outlet to screen
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
meeting up in person, right? So somebody would have to contact you. You kind of get a feel for them. You know, you can get their name, you can get them to send you a license or whatever. You can run a background check. You can reach out
Yeah.
to,
If they have a criminal record of
yeah,
assault.
like things
Yes.
like that.
Yeah.
So Backpage was taken down. And that obviously pushed a lot of workers from the online being able to screen onto the streets where things are a lot, you know, you have like 30 seconds to kind of get a vibe of somebody.
Yeah.
Um, and so it becomes a lot more um,
Unsafe.
dangerous.
Yeah.
It's dangerous, right? It also Backpage was a tool that police were able to use to
Yeah.
find trafficking victims, or you know, especially children, people who like might put up ads using certain keywords that flag, you know, the databases for these are code words for underage. So police would be able to action on that. Backpage did work very well with the FBI and CSIS and like our police, um, to track down like the IP addresses and stuff of where these
Yeah.
ads were being posted. So it served as, you know, a public safety, um, for the workers and for society at large, for
Yeah.
people who, you know,
Had a way, it had a way to track like a footprint online to
yeah,
track. And it
yeah,
also sounds like the similar to like if somebody's going to a job, they're not just going to the job and
yeah,
getting the
right.
job.
Like if
They
you're a
have to,
construction worker just
yeah,
showing up and suddenly, you know, you want to have some kind of idea of their safety record and things
yeah,
like that. So it's not even just Canadian laws that we have to worry about, but also global laws. Like the US right now is like there was the Project 2025, which outlined a lot of really horrifying plans for the future of America. Um, and a lot of the architects of that plan are now confirmed in the government down there. And they have a lot of, I mean, under the laws that they're writing now, romance books could be banned. Under their anti-porn bills, like under what they're hoping for. It is written words. It is everything to do with LGBTQ people. Um, like it is so overreaching. So one of the proposals is to criminalize publishing or putting out any type of pornography, which includes, you know, social media would have to block and ban any type of obscene content, which could be anything. You know, it could be classical paintings, like romance novels, along with, you know, porn and OnlyFans and like just cosplay. Like it could reach so far. And if that happens, I mean, all of social media is mostly based in the US. So it would all be impacted. Amazon, Apple, Google, Barnes and Noble, they would all have to comply. Uh, like Ingram Spark and Overdrive, they provide most of our libraries with books. They would have to comply. Like it would impact everybody in the English speaking world. Um, so those things are deadly. They are deadly ideologies for LGBTQ people,
yeah.
um, and for sex workers. They are going to get people hurt. Um, So yeah, like it's really scary.
So when you say like this, like the laws, I'm not really good at like
It's
following.
okay.
It's like a project 2925
Project 2025, yeah.
that they're looking to put in right now to ban like anything to do with kind of pornography
Yeah, and under a very
terminology.
Puritan lens.
Uh,
So
so
very
extremely
against any
conservative.
type of like
Yeah,
female pleasure and you know, um, even just the mention of trans people is considered obscene um, under these laws. Like it is so far reaching and it is very scary.
yeah,
And that like as a Canadian, we can't really do much about that other than, I guess, to try to diversify and get some industry in here. Um, but that'll take, you know, probably decades in order to do that. Um, so yeah, like the Canadian
understanding.
laws are hard
Yeah,
enough, but
yeah,
once you also look at the American laws, it gets really tangly.
yeah. So understanding our own personal rights and sharing what we understand with others is one step to helping educate and helping eradicate essentially
Yeah.
ignorance.
Yeah, and I think
Right?
being aware of um, where the anti-porn movements leads, like,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm in favor of protecting sex workers because they're people who deserve protection. Um, but if that's not enough, think about how it goes. Like, where does it go from there? Who determines what is pornographic? There are a lot of Hollywood movies being made that people deem pornographic, but they are very artistic and very, you know, they explore more than just sex. But I hate the term slippery slope, but it really it becomes a bubble.
yeah,
So what's obscene to one person wouldn't be to another. So it really it grows and people need to see it for what it is as being a tool for the patriarchy,
yeah.
um, as a way to police
Power and
and
control.
control what women do, how they present to the world. If suddenly just having too much cleavage in a picture is considered pornographic, like it becomes very scary very fast.
Mhm.
So I think I would advise people to look at these bills not as they seem to be presented, because a lot of the time they are presented in a way that seems very reasonable, where they're talking about like child sexual abuse images. And it's like, obviously, that is something that we are all against.
Yeah,
That absolutely should not be allowed. Uh, but then it becomes like in Australia, they they wouldn't allow women with A-cup breasts to be in pornography because they were conflating the two. And it's like if a 30-year-old woman with small breasts is being infantilized and body shamed and policed like that's not a good um, path to go down. Uh, so yeah, the anti-porn movement is very much founded in these puritanical control uh, spheres, and I just want everybody to be a bit cautious
yeah,
and look into what's actually being written, because emotionally it gets us riled up when we're like, yeah, obviously people should, we should be protecting children and we should be having legislation to do that. But the thing is we already do.
yeah.
These are already, it is already illegal to exploit children. So adding new ones, there's usually another angle to it.
It's a lot. And again, what I hear is like it comes back down to understanding, your rights and advocating for yourself in the moment. And I mean, these industries are very, it sees like there's a lot of gray area, but
Yeah,
understanding there's a definite line between trafficking,
yeah,
uh, child exploitation, and taking advantage of those that are underage,
yeah.
right?
And
Um,
how people, try to manipulate the population
yes,
to go along with things, and just be aware of your own cognitive biases, and the limits of our understanding of these things. Like, we can all only know so much about so many different things.
yeah.
Um, but yeah,
But now we've got AI, so we can just type it in and it's
yeah, that's another
another
mess.
another gray area.
Yeah,
Um, but what I want to do is just take a little bit of an education
yeah.
and break here. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of Newfoundland, the town of Dildo in Newfoundland. I came across a little bit of a fun, interesting piece of history. Is that the Beothic natives at one point in time, which were natives that were original to Newfoundland that went extinct in 1829, actually lived in Dildo at one point in time around the year 1613. And they are original, one of our original settlers, Henry Kraut, was known to have traded with the Beothic in Dildo. So I thought that was very interesting. Our family really loves the history of Beothic. And then the actual adult toy with the term dildo, which I mentioned the other week, is that it got that name. I can't remember now off the top of my head, quite a few many years ago, but during the Middle Ages, this is probably where around the time patriarchy started to take place. In Europe, especially the Middle Ages in Europe, Christianity imposed strict moral codes and sex toys were largely suppressed. But they were still used with folk traditions, and were made from wood or other natural materials and would use privately. So even though these practices at that time weren't documented extensively due to the taboo nature of such subjects, they were still very much in use, which is kind of like the talk of like sex work, because it is something that has been is something that's been going on since the time and dawn of humanity. Um, and what I want to say is that the last question I want to ask you here, Michelle, is that you've heard that term, that prostitution is one of the oldest professions. What are your opinions on this statement?
Um, so I think sex work is older than humanity. There are actual penguins that engage in sex work where the female penguin will not have sex with the male penguin unless he pays her with like enough rocks and stuff. And a lot of like birds have those mating um, kind of rituals and everything, where, yeah, no, I do not consent to anything. And then, oh, you're going to pay me or you're going to give me some treats. All right, that's fine. So, yeah, I definitely think it is something that's always been a part of our our species.
Animal
Yeah.
species.
So, yeah, it's been around forever. It's not going anywhere. All we can change is how safe it is for the people involved.
Thank you for sharing. Um, so in terms of being able to pass on your wisdom and your advice with your experiences that you've experienced, what kind of top three things would you say are important for women who are either working in the sex industry or who are advocating and advocating for those that are working in the sex industry? What are your top three pieces of advice that you would want to pass on to people?
Um, I think solidarity is always going to be a big thing. There's obviously like a pretty big class discrepancy between different, sex workers, obviously racial, cultural. I think just bringing that solidarity to the core of we're all people, we all deserve rights and protections, and we all deserve to do our job safely and come home at the end of the day safe. Um, I think that's the biggest one. Don't just advocate for yourself, but advocate, for everybody that is going to be impacted by any type of laws or any type of media portrayal, things like that. Um, I think for non-sex workers, it's definitely, there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions about what it is. There's feelings of fear and jealousy and, you know, empathy and compassion and all of these kind of things can make us really emotional when discussing these things. Sex is a very, um, heated topic. Like it's something that brings up a lot of feelings. We all have different ideas of it. Uh, so I think just trying to set a lot of that aside and be mindful about the actual material impact of media portrayals of how we talk about sex work and sex workers, um, what that can do if we're devaluing somebody's life because of, what they do for work, it makes it more dangerous. So yeah, just be considerate of those ripple effects and be very considerate about how people in power and the patriarchy can try to use those emotions to control us towards an end that we don't want.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really wants to go where these anti-porn advocates want us to go, because it would be a very unsafe, very dangerous world for women and LGBTQ people, and especially racialized women. So yeah, just be thoughtful, and when in doubt, talk to sex workers. There's a lot of sex worker advocates, sex workers online. There's a lot of great organizations. Like they are there to educate and to answer those questions in a non-judgmental way. Like yeah, so reach out. It's fine. Like ask questions, look into things. I think one of the greatest things in life is to be curious about people who aren't like you,
Yeah.
and find out what it's like for them. So yeah,
Yeah. Being curious is very, very important. It opens, keeping an open mind and a broad perspective opens your world to so many other things that you may never have thought of. So thank you for sharing that
thank you
curiosity.
for having me and letting me hopefully get people started on thinking about these things in maybe a different way or help expand what they already know.
Yeah, amazing. So I'm just gonna leave with a little bit of humor because that is the part of the podcast. So I'm gonna leave you guys with two jokes, and feel free if you know the answer, Michelle, chime on in. What's the difference between a dildo and a man at a bar? What is the difference between a dildo and a man at a bar? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone at all? The dildo doesn't need a drink to get things going. Last one. What did the dildo say to the woman at the spa? What did the dildo say to the woman at the spa? Give everybody 5 seconds to guess. Relax. I'm here to help you unwind. So thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing your insights and experience throughout this last little bit of the podcast here. And everyone, make sure to stay tuned to next Friday, as I will be interviewing a lawyer from Newfoundland who advocates and stands up for the rights against violence against women. So thank you so
Wonderful.
much. I
Yeah.
hope you
Oh,
all.
and if anybody wants some romance to heat things up, my and my husband and I write under the pen name Alexis. Abbott is our main one. We write romantic suspense. It's like John Wick, but the dog lives and there's a lot more sex.
Oh, the dog. We all hated when that dog died.
Yeah, so a lot of action, a lot of steam.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Please, I'll share that link in below if you can share the link with me, and I'll post it on the YouTube links below, along with the article that about capitalism and sex work. So thank you again, Michelle.
Thank you so